In ancient Rome, laughter often carried farther than truth, and few things drew more quiet amusement among the educated than a certain liquid, dark, sharp, and always spoken of with a curled lip. In crowded atriums, poets recited lines that teased it. They mocked its odor, its color, its humble origins by the sea. Some compared it to the runoff of markets at dusk. Others said it was proof that Romans would eat anything as long as it was salted. Listeners smiled. A few winced. Everyone knew what they were talking about. Garum, a sauce born from whole fish left to break down under the sun. A product stirred each day by workers the poets never met. Men who stood outside the city walls mixing fish and salt in tool jars because Rome refused to let the smell drift any closer. Yet the mockery hid a strange truth. The same liquid that poets joked about appeared on the tables of generals, merchants, doctors, and governors. It flavored vegetables in hillside farms. It cured wounds in crowded baths. It crossed the sea in clay vessels, stamped with the names of men whose fortunes depended on it. And in time, one particular kind of garum, clear, amber, almost luminous, would be sold for more than wine. The poets never stopped laughing, but Rome kept buying. This is the story of how a substance born from decay became one of the most valued tastes of an empire, mocked in verse, traded as wealth, and stirred every day beneath a sky that refused to hide its truth. While poets sharpened their wit in shaded courtyards, another Rome existed beyond their sight. Along the coastline of Campania and the far stretches of Hispania Beatica, men worked in silence. They carried baskets of fish from the morning catch, mackerel, anchovies, mullet, whatever the sea had offered that day. They lifted the fish whole, still slick from the surf, and dropped them into deep jars with coarse salt measured by handfuls, not spoons. The process was crude by Roman standards. No perfumes, no spices, no ceremony. Just fish, salt, heat, and time. Rome tolerated much, but not the smell. Garum factories, officinae, were banned within city limits. They were placed downwind or near the shore, where the breeze could carry their odor away from crowded streets. Yet these same factories supplied the capital with a product so essential that its absence could disrupt kitchens, feasts, and even religious offerings. The mockery of poets made garum sound like a joke, but the work behind it revealed something different, a rhythm of labor that fed a vast and restless empire. Every jar that reached Rome carried the heat of a distant coast. Every drop that seasoned a dish came from the hands of workers whose names would never appear in any poem. And as Rome grew, its market swelling and its appetite widening, those workers mixed their vats day after day, stirring not just fish, but the quiet machinery of Roman life. One world laughed, the other labored, and garum flowed between them. To the Roman eye, garum began where most foods ended, in decomposition. Whole fish were salted until their bodies stiffened. Salt drew out their liquid, slowly at first, then in streams that pooled at the bottom of terracotta jars. The sun warmed the mixture. Heat softened scales, skin, and bone, until the fish collapsed into a thick slurry that no poet could describe without a smirk. But beneath that unpleasant surface, something precise was happening. Salt prevented rot. Enzymes within the fish, especially the organs, broke down proteins into amino acids, and among those amino acids was glutamate, the same compound that gives modern broths and sauces their depth. Romans didn't know the word umami, but they knew the effect. A small spoonful sharpened vegetables, diffused the bitterness of greens, lifted the flavor of meat far beyond what salt alone could do. Garum wasn't an accident. It was chemistry, discovered long before chemistry had a name. different regions produced different strengths. Fish from the Black Sea made one kind. Fish from the warm waters of North Africa made another. But the most prized came from Spain, from the fisheries of Baetica, where mackerel were abundant and the sun was relentless. There, the process produced a liquid so clear it glowed amber in the light. Romans called it garum sociorum, the garum of allies, and as its reputation grew, so did its price. For a liquid born of decay, it carried a surprising truth. It was one of the finest tastes an empire had ever known. Pliny the Elder wrote that certain garums were so prized they sold for more than perfumes, and among them all none was more coveted than garum sociorum. 2 congi, a modest amount, could cost 1,000 sesterces, a year's pay for a Roman legionary, enough to feed a family for months. This was no kitchen staple. It was a luxury, a status symbol, a gift worthy of Saturnalia, when wealthy citizens exchanged rare items to honor the winter season. The poet Martial wrote an epigram about sending garum as a present. He joked, "An expensive gift," though even he seemed aware that calling it expensive was part boast, part apology. But why would anyone pay so much for a sauce mocked in verse? Flavor was only part of the answer. Prestige was the rest. Baetica's garum was made from mackerel caught in specific waters, treated with specific salt, and fermented under specific heat. Its clarity distinguished it from lesser versions. No bones, no sediment, just liquid light. Even the vessels mattered. Amphorae, stamped with the names of respected makers like Aulus Scaurus of Pompeii, traveled across the empire. Finding his mark was assurance that the contents were genuine, not an imitation made by those hoping to profit from Rome's appetite. To own such a jar was to hold a fragment of distant coasts, a taste of a world beyond the capital. The poets could laugh, but the wealthy poured it freely, trusting its sharp brightness to elevate dishes that would otherwise seem plain. Value, Rome proved again and again, did not always follow dignity. Sometimes it followed desire. Despite its elite versions, garum was not reserved for the wealthy. Rome had many grades of fish sauce, some refined, some crude, some made entirely from the leftover paste after the finest liquid was drawn. The best went to governors and merchants. The rest went everywhere else. In small apartments perched above noisy streets, families added a splash to vegetable stews. In taverns near the Forum, cooks mixed it with wine or vinegar to make dipping sauces. Sailors carried rougher versions on long voyages, using it to preserve or disguise tough cuts of meat. Apicius, the Roman author whose recipes shaped centuries of cooking, used garum in nearly everything. In sauces for pork, in dressings for greens, even in certain desserts that needed a balance of sweetness and salt. To modern taste, this seems unlikely. To Roman taste, it was essential. Garum replaced salt, not just because it seasoned, but because it enriched. It added depth to dishes that otherwise had little. It kept vegetables lively even when stored too long. It stretched the flavor of cheap ingredients during lean months. And in a city that depended on grain imports and uncertain harvests, that mattered. Romans lived close to hunger. Garum helped hold it back. So while poets joked about its smell, ordinary families used it as a quiet assurance that the next meal, however simple, would still taste whole. The liquid mocked in literature was the same liquid that helped Rome eat every day. To the Roman mind, food and medicine were close relatives, and garum lived comfortably in both worlds. Dioscorides, the first-century physician whose writings guided healers for centuries, praised fish sauce for treating sores in the mouth. He recommended it for ulcerating wounds, for dog bites, even for infections that spread through the cheeks. Culamella, writing on agriculture, warned beekeepers not to eat garum before handling hives. Its odor, he wrote, upset the bees, but he also noted its usefulness for clearing mucus from horses. Pliny echoed the same pattern. He criticized the excess surrounding luxury garum, but offered remedies in which it appeared again and again. To modernize, this seems contradictory. To Romans, it was simply practical. Garum was both strong and stable. Its salinity prevented spoilage. Its fermentation produced compounds that slowed infection. And in an age without antibiotics, anything that stung, sealed, or soothed had value. Even the dregs, the thick paste left at the bottom of fermentation jars, were used medicinally. Some mixed it into salves, others used it as a purgative. It was not pleasant, but medicine rarely was. And so the liquid mocked in poems became in practice an instrument of healing. The poets could keep their jokes. Families, soldiers, and healers kept their garum. Ancient writers often warned about the smell of garum. Some said it clung to clothing. Others claimed it seeped into the walls of markets or lingered on hands long after washing. But the truth was more complex. During fermentation, most of the odor remained inside the vats. Sun warmed the mixture, but salt prevented true rot. The result was sharp, but not always foul. Modern recreations confirm this. For weeks, garum smells more like a fish market than decay. The real shock came when the liquid was disturbed, when workers stirred their vats, or when the final paste was removed from the bottom. At that moment, the scent was fierce enough to command laws. Roman towns required factories to operate away from busy streets. Pliny mentions that certain industries were pushed to the outskirts specifically because of their odor. But this intensity did not mean the product was spoiled. It was simply the nature of fermentation combined with heat. Once drained and settled, the finest garum carried only a light briny aroma that Roman cooks valued for its clarity. This contrast between the harshness of creation and the refinement of the final liquid only widened the gap between the workers who made garum and the elites who consumed it. For some, the smell was a reason to mock. For others, it was simply the cost of producing something the empire could not live without. In the ruins of Pompeii, archaeologists found amphorae stamped with a single name, Aulus Umbricius Scaurus. To anyone in the ancient world, his mark meant one thing: quality. Scaurus owned one of the most successful garum workshops in the empire. His products traveled from Campania to Gaul, to North Africa, even to Rome itself. Nearly a third of all garum containers found in Pompeii bear his stamp. His workshop produced multiple grades. Some were thick and strong, others were bright and clear, but each carried the same promise. This was garum made carefully, stirred daily, and strained until the liquid shone. Scaurus understood something essential about Roman taste. People bought garum not only for flavor, but for trust. Authenticity mattered. Stamping the amphora told buyers that what they purchased was real, not a cheaper imitation. In a world where trade stretched across seas and borders, reputations carried weight, and Scaurus built his carefully, jar by jar. The mosaics found in his home reflect this pride. One of them shows tall vessels labeled flor slicomanis, the flower of fish sauce. Not a humble claim, but one Rome seems to have accepted. The existence of such a workshop proves that behind every amphora sold for extravagant prices there was a full industry of craftsmen, carriers, and laborers whose work kept the empire fed. The poets never wrote about Scaurus, but his garum outlived them all. By the late 2nd century, garum's golden age began to fade. Trade routes shifted. Political tensions disrupted coastal industries. Some fishing towns declined as the empire strained under war and economic pressure. Urban centers kept consuming fish sauce, but supply grew uncertain. Factories that once produced amphora after amphora slowed their work. Others closed entirely. Some historians believe cheaper substitutes filled the gap. Mixtures made from salted fish scraps, vinegar, or herbs became more common. They lacked the clarity of true garum, but they were easier to produce and required less time. By the end of the empire, garum survived mostly in medicine. Doctors still used it for wounds and infections. Farmers kept rough versions for treating animals. But the luxurious liquid once traded like perfume slipped quietly into obscurity. When Rome fell, its fish sauce fell with it. Yet its story remained, traced through poetry, inscriptions, and the amphorae scattered across ancient coasts. The liquid, mocked for its smell, had once in the taste of an empire. And even as it disappeared, its memory lingered in the kitchens and manuscripts of those who had relied on it for generations. Today, the word garum survives mostly in books. Its factories are ruins, its amphorae sit behind glass. Its scent, sharp, divisive, unforgettable, is long gone from the wind. But its story remains clear. A liquid born from patience and heat shaped the rhythm of an empire. Workers stirred it under the open sun. Cooks used it to steady meals during lean seasons. Merchants traded it across seas. Doctors trusted it to soothe wounds. And poets mocked it from comfortable rooms, never imagining that centuries later their words would reveal a contradiction Rome itself never resolved. Garum was humble. Garum was essential. Garum was expensive enough to rival wine. And for a time, it fed a world that depended on discipline, labor, and the quiet endurance of ordinary people. Most tastes fade. Most crafts disappear. But some stories remain, not because of grandeur, but because they touched every household, every table, every life. Garum was one of them. The poets mocked it, Rome lived on it, and history, in its long memory, kept them both.